Good morning, everyone. It's so great to see all of you here so bright and early on a Saturday. We've got a couple more minutes before we get started, but I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for being here. So we'll give everyone a couple more seconds to get on and then we'll get started. Okay, it's 9 o'clock straight up. And I like to reward all of us that managed to somehow drag ourselves out of bed this early on Saturday morning. So we're going to go ahead and get started right away. Thank you all for being here. That is just awesome to see so many of you here. Especially for a class that's on Zoom. Zoom is not my favorite format to take classes on, and Saturday mornings is not my favorite time to do it. So I'm just super impressed with all of you for making the time to be here today. Thank you very much. We are going to go ahead and do some housekeeping things and then introductions, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So I first want to say how much I appreciate you having your cameras on. I know, again, that Zoom cameras, Saturday morning, all of those things make it very difficult to want to turn on your cameras. But it really does help me as an instructor to be able to see that I'm not just talking to myself. I have a lot of teenagers in my home, so I feel like I do that the majority of the time. So I prefer if when I'm talking, I feel like I have some interaction going on. It also helps because the level 3 class is really a class where we kind of get to know each other, and it's really great if there's lots of participation and interaction. And so it's just wonderful if you can turn your cameras on. I myself have children, and I'll have, as much as I've tried to keep them out, I'm sure they'll be popping in once in a while. So I understand the need to turn your cameras off once in a while. As you're dealing with things, but then just turn it back on when you have a second. So that would really help me out a lot. All of you, it seems like you're Zoom pros. You already have your mutes on. If you can keep the mute on when you're not talking, that's very helpful to avoid the background noise. However, I really, as I already said, really like the participation that we usually have in our level 3 classes. it really helps me to know what's going on, and if there's ways I can help you. Or what I've really found is that ways that we can help each other. The group that comes to this class seems to be a very knowledgeable group. And so I really like when you guys can share your ideas and your thoughts and your perspectives or your questions with all of us. I have found that if it's a question you have, it's probably a question another person has. So feel free to ask, feel free to add your input to this class, because I have learned a lot from teaching it by the people that have attended. So please unmute yourself as needed. We will try to take a break every hour, just so you can kind of get up and stretch those muscles, make sure the house is still in order, all of those kind of things. So plan on that. Most of the classes do take the entire 3 hours, not always, but just plan on that. And that way, if we get out early, you're just extra happy. So that works well. Right now, we're just going to go ahead and do introductions while people are still joining us, just because it helps me to know who's in the class and the ages of the kids that you're working with and everything. So if you wouldn't mind, I'm just going to call out your name, and then if you can just unmute and then just tell us a little bit about yourself, that would be awesome. I will go with kind of who's on my list first, and that's Elsha and Chris Finlayson. Did I say that right? I'm horrible.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. I'm Alicia. Yeah.
Sorry. I'm horrible.
That's okay. Don't worry about it. My husband will only be here the second and fourth Saturday because he works every other Saturday. But we've actually done this training before a few years ago. It was down in St. George when we lived down there. Yeah, we currently have a 2 and a 3-year-old. We adopted them in December, right before Christmas. Yeah.
Congratulations. How long have you guys been foster parents?
5 years.
Awesome. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Maddie Logan, you're next up on my list.
Okay. Hi. Just kind of getting our Saturday morning together. We are recent foster parents, and this is our first time taking this training. We have some more difficult kids, so it was suggested to us to get some of level 3 training, just to get a little bit more familiar with some of the things that would be beneficial. I work in preschool and Head Start, so I have some trauma-informed care and training, but we always know that, and I know that every day you can get more and more, but so yeah, so it'll be fun. I'm excited. My husband's listening too. Great. He's just around here. He'll probably get on his own phone in a minute, or if he's up on there.
He just joined, so that was great. How old are the kids that you have?
We have a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 5-year-old.
Wow, that's a lot.
And it's our first placement, so yeah, wow. It's been crazy, but it's been good.
Well, good for you guys. Well, thank you for joining us. That's wonderful. Jennifer Eden.
Hi. So my husband and I have been doing foster care for about 3.5 years now. We've adopted 3 kids. We have 2 10-year-old twins and a 3-year-old. What else? I don't know. I'm just interested in doing the level 3. We actually had a placement that they would have put at a level 3, but nobody knew how to help us get the training. So I don't know. Is this a newer thing that they're doing? I've seen it the last.
No, we've been doing it online for most of the year now.
Well, but just in this last year, was that something they did before?
No, so the regions used to offer it. All the regions would offer the training, like,
okay.
And it wouldn't be every month. It would just be kind of like when there was enough of a need.
Okay.
So, but it is nice that we can do it online now. So
yeah.
We have people from all over the state joining us. So that's wonderful. Where do you live?
We are in Emery County in Cleveland, Albert Price.
Yeah, so that was one of the harder. I live in Cedar City, and those harder, smaller areas, it was really hard to get to the classes all the time. So this is a really nice way. I keep telling people that's the only good thing about coronavirus is these classes being online is very helpful to a lot of people.
It is, yeah.
Good. Well, glad to have you join us.
Thanks.
Jamie Chapman, you're up next on my thing.
I'm Mark Chapman. My wife,
Oh.
Amy, she's still at work right now, but she should
That's
be
fine.
soon. We have a 17-year-old that we're actually fostering right now, but we're going to be going through the adoption court stuff Monday morning.
Wow, congratulations.
Thanks. And it's been a handful, definitely a handful.
17-year-olds usually are.
Yeah. She's
How long
kinda-
have you been? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
She's ornery at times, but we're working through it.
That's good. That's the key, is to work through it. How long have you been foster parents?
We were certified last year, and we got her as a foster placement in beginning of July last year. So
Wow, and you're already going through adoption. That's great.
yeah.
Well, good. Congratulations. That's exciting. And
Thanks.
whenever she joins us, that's just fine. I understand the
Yes,
hectic
Be
schedules.
home in probably about a half hour or so.
Okay, that sounds great. Let's see. Phil, I'm not even going to try your last name. I'm sorry. I really am bad at names.
Oh, that's okay. So I've been working with boarding schools for 16 years, I believe, both international, and I've done orphanage care overseas when I lived overseas as well. And I actually, when I was in Montana a couple of years ago, I was a principal, and there was this homeless teen that wanted to graduate. And then I realized there's not much for teenagers available, at least in Montana. And so that kind of got me into this. When I moved here, I just decided to take the leap, and whether it's respite care or long term, it doesn't matter to me. But I know that teenagers are often a neglected group.
Absolutely. Well, and it sounds like you have a lot of experience along with everyone else that's shared. So you're one that I'll want lots of comments from. So thank you for joining us today.
Yep. Thank you.
Mary E.
Yes, hi. Sorry, I don't know why my video's not working.
Yeah, it doesn't
So,
show anything, but that's okay.
I know, it might be the computer I'm on. I'm sorry. So next time I'll use a different computer. But so my husband and I, he has 4 biological kids. So I have 4 stepkids, ages 18, 16, 13, and 12. And then we have, this is our 3rd placement, and we have 3 kids right now, ages 12, 8, and 6. So
Wow, you have a
we
household
have a
then.
house. Yeah, we do. And all of them have definitely had trauma. And so it's just something I've been interested in and want to learn how to help them better. So
That's great. How long have you guys been foster parents?
we've been foster parents for 2 years.
2 years?
Yeah, about 2 years.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us. Carson, you're up next on my list.
All right. Me and my wife, Leisha Ann, have been fostering for about 2 years now. We've fostered several, but we've adopted one 8-year-old, and we live in Utah County.
Awesome. And we are excited to have you and your wife.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us. Michelle Anderson.
Sorry, technology challenged.
I hear you. I'm that way every day.
Michelle Anderson, and we have been fostering about 5 years now. We just recently in December adopted our 2 foster children ages 11 and 14. And then we have a daughter that's getting married, a son that is married, who gave me my first grandchild.
That's so
So-
exciting. What a big year for you with the first grandchild and adoptions. That's exciting.
2020 was an awesome year for us. So we're excited.
I'm glad to hear that for somebody. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Let's see, Victoria Stanley.
All right, so I have been fostering about a year now, still pretty new at it, but I also work as a special ed teacher, and I've had several kiddos. We're kind of in an area where we tend to get a lot of kiddos that are in care that come through our office. So I've kind of worked with them on the teacher end and then now on the parent end. So I'm excited to have this class to just kind of have a few more tools. Currently at home, I have a 2-year-old running around and waiting for backup to get here and kind of help with corralling her on a Saturday morning, because Saturday mornings tend to be when we have the most energy. So
I know, isn't that crazy? Saturday mornings is when I'm the most tired and my kids are like raring to go. And I'm like, what? We just survived the week. Do we need to do anything else?
Yep, I feel the same way.
Well, great. We're glad to have you, and don't feel, I totally get 2-year-olds. So if you need to take, mute or whatever you need to do, that's just fine. I understand.
Awesome. Thank you.
Let's see. I see a lot of spouses that I've already gotten the first person on. Is there anyone that I'm missing? It's kind of hard sometimes to see on here. Anyone that wanted to introduce themselves that I didn't get to? Oh, Maddie, Maddie Logan. Oh, and Wyatt Logan. I did that. I get that one. I just put the name down twice. Sorry.
I think my wife introduced herself already, but I need to introduce myself. I'm Wyatt Logan. I'm turning 25 this year. Like my wife said, we just kind of barely started fostering. We just have the one placement so far with 3 kids. One just had her birthday. The other one's having her birthday at the end of the month. So a lot of Minnie Mouse themed stuff around the house right now.
That's kind of fun. Well, great. Well, thank you very much for joining us. And thank you all. I'm just so impressed as I'm looking through my list here. We have so many people with so much experience here. So this is going to be just an awesome class. And I'm just really grateful to have all of you. Just so now that we have everyone hopefully joined, I will go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Amy Bates. I have been a foster parent for 21 years and an adoptive parent for about that long as well. I've adopted 8 of my children and I have 2 biological children. And I also work with Utah Foster Care, obviously. They wouldn't let me get on here and talk to you. I've worked with Utah Foster Care for about 8 years now. I help with a foster adopt consultant, and then I'm also a part-time trainer. So that's kind of a little bit about me. Right now, I have a lot of teenagers in my home. All of my kids were really close together in age. And now that they've all grown up, they're all teenagers, all close in age. So I tell people I have absolutely no self-esteem left. So it's hard raising teenagers, even great, wonderful teenagers. It's just really hard. So hopefully we can just kind of commiserate together and we can learn together as we're going through this. A lot of my children, because they've been adopted through foster care, have experienced trauma. I would say all of my children that have been adopted through foster care, and probably even my biological children at this point, have experienced some trauma. So we will just be talking about that as we go along. And if you guys have a chat, I just had a chat to come through, so that's why I'm trying to look. So if you guys have any questions, please, as I said in the beginning, just go ahead and unmute yourself or comment. We really like to hear from you and gain your perspective too. This class is level 3, as we've all mentioned. It is what you need to do to complete to be considered level 3 for DCFS. Those of you that are unfamiliar with that, it's just kind of the level system that they label the children. Labeling children is not my I don't think that's the best way to do it, but it's the way we've got right now. So they look at the behaviors and the needs of the children and decide what level they're on. And if they have a lot of needs, then usually they'll be labeled level 3. To be considered a level 3 foster parent, you need the extra training, you need some experience, you need to be a little bit crazy, and you need to take this class. To get credit for this class, what you will do is at the end of the class, I'll give you a survey that you've been filling out for all the other instructors. You'll fill out that survey. And then the worksheets that I sent you when I sent you the link for this class, you will take those and send them to your RFC, whoever's in your region. The reason why we do that is every region is different. So as I've already mentioned, this is a state class. I'm here down in Cedar City. There's some of you up in North. There's some of you over in Emery County. So every region kind of does it a little bit different. So to account for that, we just decided to loop in your RFCs. I think it's a good idea when you're sending your worksheets to also send it to your regional trainer. So whoever that may be, Terry, Les, Brian, whoever Denise, whoever that is, just CC them on the worksheets. When you do that, they will be able to give you that level 3 classification because DCFS is the one who's supposed to make that final call. You and your spouse do need to watch all 4 videos. If you can't make it to a class, I can give you the recording of a class if you need to, but we really do prefer you to be online if possible. I realize that's not always possible, so just let me know and we can deal with that on a case-by-case basis. And then you and your spouse will both need to turn in the worksheets. So it's not, you need to do one and the other person needs to do a worksheet as well. So it's not one where you can share and copy and all that kind of stuff. Although you probably could copy. I'm just saying you have to turn in your own papers. So does that all make sense? It's kind of a little bit confusing the way we're doing it. But the survey at the end will get you the credit for the hours. So some people sometimes are taking this class and they don't necessarily want to be level 3 certified. Make sure you turn in the survey at the end. And then if you want to get that level 3 certification, you'll want to make sure you turn in your worksheets to your RFC. And I also like to include your regional trainer if you can. So make sense? Hopefully. And as we go along, we'll talk about it more. The class is from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. It's the one that DCFS has said that would be the most helpful in dealing with children that have experienced trauma. Some of it is repeat from pre-service, but it's all good information and that's why we go over it again. I sometimes think that DCFS or some people will come to the class and think that it's going to be a magic solution. And it's not. I don't have a magic bullet for you. I wish I did. That would be really great. And I would sell it and make lots of money. But I do think this class is really helpful in changing our behavior and our mindset as adults. So I don't know that it does a lot for the child. And I shouldn't say that. It does a lot for the child because when we change our mindset, it really helps the child too. But I'm not going to give you a lot of behavior modification ideas. I'm more going to talk about what trauma does to the child and what that looks like when the child has experienced trauma. And when we start to understand that a little bit better, we start to deal with the behaviors and the things that come because of trauma a little bit better, has been my experience at least. When I have a child who's acting out, and I'm looking at them thinking, oh my gosh, you're just doing this to push my buttons or because you're naughty or because you're just trying to get under my skin, I tend to react negatively to that child. I tend to not be very compassionate. I don't really focus on the relationship at all. I'm really just annoyed with that child. When I look at the child and their behaviors from a trauma-informed lens, I am much more compassionate. When I'm saying, oh, this child is doing this because they did not have a lot of food when they were younger, or they are acting this way because of the trauma that they experienced in their birth home or because of the multiple moves that they've had, then I'm likely to take my time, be a lot more patient, like I said, a lot more compassionate, and I'm more likely to be focused on the relationship rather than the behavior. And so things just go better between my child and me. And so that's kind of what this class will do, in my opinion. I don't think it necessarily is. So if you're coming, and I like to be very upfront, if you're coming looking for how to change your child, you're probably going to be disappointed. This is really not a class about how to change your child. I really feel like it's more of a class to how to change your mindset and how you look and think about trauma. And all of you, I'm sure, have already experienced a lot of trauma-informed care. Like I said, there's a lot of experience in this room. So you all have a general idea of what it means to be trauma-informed. But hopefully as we talk, you'll have a better idea and a better understanding, and we can all give each other ideas and suggestions of how to do this better. So why a trauma workshop? Because children in foster care have lived through trauma experiences. Kind of a duh, right? Like, of course they have. We understand that. Children that have had to come into care have had trauma. It doesn't matter if their story is not newsworthy or super, super bad. Just the fact that they've had to come into foster care and lose that primary family is a trauma experience. And so we need to be aware that they've experienced trauma. We need to be aware that children bring their traumas with them into our homes. So as I was introducing myself earlier, I said all of my 8 children who we've adopted have experienced trauma, and probably my 2 other children biologically have experienced trauma at this point, because those children through the years have brought trauma into our home. Not any fault of their own, of course, but just because of what they've had to deal with, they've brought trauma into our home. And we've had to learn to work around that and how to deal with that. And so that's why we have this trauma workshop. The trauma affects a child's behaviors, feelings, relationships, and view of the world in profound ways. I can't remember who said it, but the Head Start teacher that was talking and said she's already becoming trauma informed. That is amazing. In our schools and our communities, more and more people are becoming trauma informed, which is wonderful because we're understanding that trauma affects our kids in profound ways. It's not just children in foster care either. There's children throughout our community that are experiencing trauma. And so all of us becoming better trauma informed is becoming helpful. And that's kind of the new push right now in Head Start, in schools, in churches. Everyone's becoming more trauma informed because we understand now that trauma affects the child's feelings and behaviors in really significant ways. Trauma also affects us. I won't have anyone raise your hand, but I'll raise my hand twice. Trauma affects us significantly as foster parents, whether it's just in hearing the stories of the children. I have spent many nights crying myself to sleep just in hearing about what my children have gone through. Or if it's when they come in and their behaviors and their feelings about that trauma, that causes me trauma as well. So we need to be aware and kind of sympathetic with ourselves that trauma is going to impact us as well. It's going to impact our marriages, our relationships with our other children, our jobs, perhaps. Trauma is going to impact us. It's kind of like that gift that keeps on giving. You know, when you have a child that's experienced significant trauma, then you're probably going to get some of that trauma on yourself. And we're going to talk about some ways to help with that. That could look like compassion fatigue, painful memories, secondary traumatization. Trauma's effects on a child and on us can disrupt a placement. That's what we want to avoid, right? And to be clear and upfront, we can't always avoid that. And I don't want anyone to ever feel guilty if they can't have a child stay in their home. But the goal would be that we wouldn't have to have children move. And sometimes we do have to have children move because their behaviors are so out of control and they need a higher level of support than we can give them. But if we, as the caregivers, can become more trauma informed, then there's a greater likelihood that we can handle their behaviors and these big emotions that they have without the child having to move. And that's what we'd like to all avoid if possible. And so that's why we're having this trauma workshop. And that's why they suggest doing the level 3 classes. A lot of you, even if you don't have a child who is considered level 3, they prefer you to take these classes because it's just very helpful given the fact that all the things we just talked about. There's a quote here that says, No one really explained to me about the impact of trauma on a child's life. I wish I'd known more about trauma sooner. And that's from Foster Dad. I agree with this. When I started being a foster parent 21 years ago, a long, long time ago, trauma wasn't really on anyone's radar at the time. We were just starting to learn more and more about the brain and how it works and the impact of trauma, but I really didn't understand how trauma impacted my children. We are so lucky now that the research is kind of trying to catch up and showing what happens when the child experiences trauma, and showing that impact and the actual brain damage that happens when a child experiences trauma. There's just so much out there now about how this happens and what we can do about it too. So we're kind of in a great state right now where all this information is coming at us, and we can really learn and apply it and hopefully help our children that we're working with. So what we will be learning. We're doing modules 1 and 2 today. We'll do 2 modules each time we meet. That's every Saturday at 9 a.m. for the next 4 Saturdays. So today we're just doing the basics we'll also add Trauma 101 on it. Modules 3 and 4 are understanding trauma's effects and building a safe place. 5 and 6 are dealing with feelings and behaviors and connection and healing. And 7 and 8, I think, should be the beginning, but they do it at the end because I think those are really important classes, becoming an advocate and taking care of yourself. So those are all of the classes that we'll be going over. As I said before, if you're not looking to get licensed as level 3, you're welcome just to take what classes you need or the hours that you need. But all of them should be helpful to you in working with children that are in foster care. Some of the ground rules, and we don't necessarily need these quite as much because of Zoom, but one person speaks at a time. It's okay to disagree, respect everyone's contributions. This one is important. If a topic or activity makes you uncomfortable, feel free to take a time out. When we're talking about trauma, sometimes it can bring up our own trauma. And so I want everyone to feel free to just take a 5-minute break. Please do come back. Please let me know if I'm triggering you and causing some uncomfortableness. But please make sure you're taking care of yourself throughout this training and not putting yourself in an uncomfortable position. That's really hard for me to judge when we're on Zoom. Usually in a classroom setting, I can kind of gauge the room a little bit better. I can't do that here. So please just be aware of things that are bothering you and take the time that you need to deal with it. This is the feelings thermometer that we put up just to kind of look at there and see, make sure you're just right. Make sure I'm not too boring or it's not too, uninteresting down there at the ice cold or the cool, a little bit bored, falling asleep. Make sure that you're kind of just in that just right zone. I definitely don't want anyone up in the very uncomfortable or hot zone up there. So please just take care of yourself on this one, because with Zoom, it's just really hard for me to tell if you need that time or not. So please feel free to take that as needed. With that, any questions or comments or just anything that we've just gone over that anyone had to add? Okay, well, we will just dive right in then. So, and just real quick, most of you should have received the book and you should have received it online too. We will be using the My Child worksheets. So you'll want to have that where you can reach those. And you can just, even if you have a piece of paper, that will be fine as well. But we will be using those My Child worksheets throughout the whole 4 weeks. And so make sure you have those available each time. This quote says, "There was a child, went forth every day, and all that he looked at became a part of him." Experience become part of our fiber. They become part of who we are. And so, just being aware of every experience that we have just helps to change and helps us to create who we are and who we are becoming. And that's the same for our children. And and if they're negative experiences, they're going to change us for, they're going to impact us, and positive experiences are going to impact us as well. So every experience that we have is going to impact us in some way. We are going to, as we go throughout this class, we're going to talk about some kids throughout the class. So I'm kind of just going to give you a general description of them. I will keep reminding you about them because it's hard to keep them in your mind. But we'll be talking about these kids throughout the next 4 weeks. This is Maya. She is 8 months old. She is in foster care with her aunt. She wakes up crying in the middle of the night. She pushes against her shoulders, doesn't like to be comforted, screams even harder when she is picked up. When her aunt tries to make eye contact with her, the baby turns her head away. The baby makes me feel completely rejected, the foster parent says, the aunt says. Sometimes I feel so helpless. I just have to put her down and let her cry. This little girl, her mom was 17 years old, and she experienced some physical abuse before coming to live with her aunt. Since being placed in care, this is Rachel. She's 17 months old. Since being placed in care, she has little interest in food and has lost 1 pound. She used to say mama, dada, baba. So she used to have some words, but she has stopped talking. She often stands by the door or window, silently looking around as if waiting for someone. She came into care because of neglect or failure to protect with her mom. This is Tommy. He 4 years old, plays repeatedly with a toy police car and ambulance, crashing them into each other, making the sounds of sirens. When his foster father tries to change Tommy's play, Tommy screams and throws the police car and ambulance. He's only been in foster care for 3 weeks, and he's in foster care due to domestic violence. As we're talking about some of these children, I would expect that some of you would recognize some of these behaviors in the children that you're caring for. And so that's what we're bringing up, is these children that have experienced trauma and some of their stories. This is Andrea, 9 years old. She enjoys reading with her foster father. One day she was sitting on his lap. She began to rub herself up and down against his crotch. Shocked and startled, Andrea's foster father pushed her away, roughly telling her to get out of here. Andrea ran to her room sobbing, "Why does everyone hate me?" and began frantically packing her suitcase. She experienced severe neglect. This is her 3rd foster home that she's been in, and she's only been in there for 1 month. She has biological brothers that she was not placed with in this home. So she obviously has a lot of trauma as well. This is James, who's 12 years old. He is withdrawn and unresponsive with his foster parents. When asked what he wants, he says, "Whatever," and shrugs his shoulders. James has been failing classes at school and hanging out with kids who dress in black. When James moved in, his foster parents asked if he wanted to put up some pictures of his grandparents, but he said, "No, I don't. Leave me alone," and retreated to his bedroom. He had lived with his grandparents prior to coming into foster care, but his grandfather died, and so he was no longer able to live with them. And he's been living with his foster family for 6 months. Javier, 15, this is the last child that we'll talk about. He had gotten in trouble for not paying attention and joking around in class. Now he's skipping class to drink or smoke pot in a nearby park. At a party, Javier saw a friend verbally abusing a girl. When his friend pushed the girl, Javier beat up his friend. When his caseworker asked what happened, Javier said, "I don't know. I just went into kill mode." He's in foster care for domestic violence. He's been in care for about a year, and he also experienced physical abuse. So I'm imagining that a lot of you can recognize or see some of these same behaviors or attitudes or thoughts or words that you've experienced with children in your care. And as I said, we'll talk about these children throughout the case, just to kind of bring up the actual children. I know all of you have a child in mind, or a child that you're working with, or a child that you have worked with. But because we can't really have those personal interactions, the curriculum gives us these children to kind of keep in mind that we're talking about actual children that have experienced trauma, and why they experience it the way that they do. So sound familiar? I'm sure most of you can relate. The challenge here is caring for children who have been through trauma can leave resource parents feeling confused, frustrated, unappreciated, angry, helpless. I don't know about you guys, but when I signed up to be a foster parent, I wasn't saying, you know, where can I sign up to be unappreciated, confused, angry, and helpless? Like, what line do I sign for that one, right? That's not the reason I started wanting to be a foster parent. I wanted to be a foster parent because I wanted to help children, and I wanted to help families be successful. I never got into it thinking, oh, I'm going to sign up for this really, you know, and they're going to be mad at me. I'm going to be mad all the time. I'm going to feel frustrated all the time. That's not why I did foster care. But sometimes, because of the trauma that the children bring into our lives, that's how we'll end up feeling. And so we're going to talk about how we can change those feelings a little bit, and so that you're not feeling those ways if you are. I know I have felt those ways many a times. And so we're going to talk about different ways that we can avoid those feelings, or at least work through them. When you understand what trauma is and how it has affected your child, it becomes easier to communicate with your child, improve your child's behavior and attitudes, get your child the help he or she needs, reduce the risk of your own compassion fatigue or secondary trauma. There is hope, and become a more effective, satisfied resource parent. I hate trainings where I go away feeling like there's no hope, or that trauma has negatively impacted my child so much, and the brain damage that they've sustained because of it, there's just no hope. So why even try? We're going to be talking about some hard subjects here and some hard things that our kids have gone through. I want you to know that there absolutely is hope. I've had children in my home that have gone through extremely hard things, like I'm sure a lot of the children that you've worked with have. And we have been just at ahead 24/7, it felt like. We were just could not get any relationship going. We had no communication. I was always frustrated. They were always frustrated. It was I've had many times where I've just felt like, what am I doing? I'm doing it all wrong. And I'm sure the child didn't feel any better about the situation. When I started looking at things through a trauma-informed lens, and when I started working on the relationship, so some of that TBRI stuff that we often talk about, things started to get better in my home, with me personally, and with the child. So I want to make sure you know that there is hope. I really do feel like this is a helpful class to take. Again, not so much because it's going to change your child, but hopefully it's going to change your way of looking at your child. And then therefore you'll react differently, and then your child will react differently. So hopefully don't feel overwhelmed. Don't feel like there is no hope. There is hope, and things can change. Just like the brain can change from trauma, the brain can change because of loving and consistent parenting. So know that there is hope at the end of this rainbow. Recognize the impact. So we're going to, the essential elements of a trauma-informed parenting. So there's 9 essential elements. Hopefully you'll remember some of them from your pre-service training. Recognize the impact trauma has had on your child. Help your child to feel safe. Help your child to understand and manage overwhelming emotions. Help your child to understand and modify problem behaviors. Respect and support positive, stable, and enduring relationships in the life of your child. Help your child develop a strength-based understanding of his or her own story. Be an advocate for your child. Promote and support trauma-focused assessments and treatment for your children. And take care of yourself. So these are the elements that we're going to be talking throughout this class. and things that you should be doing throughout your foster care experience. And so hopefully all of these things we'll kind of touch on. If you have any questions or anything, we can kind of go over it as the class goes on. Some myths to avoid, that my love should be enough to erase the effects of everything bad that happened before. I won't make anyone raise their hand again, but again, I'll raise my hand twice and just admit that I really thought that that was going to be the case with me, that I could just love these kids and everything was going to be better and that was going to be enough for them. I've come to find out that it's very much not the case, that my love is not enough to erase all the bad things that happened to them, even though I really, really love my children. So that's one myth that we're going to talk about and avoid. My child should be grateful and love me as much as I love him or her. Sometimes foster parents have the idea that, we've taken them out of a really bad negative situation. And so they'll come into our home and they'll be so grateful because they have food now, right? And they never had food before, or they have a nice warm bed to sleep in and they didn't have that before. Often our children are not grateful when they come into our home, and they shouldn't be. Children deserve a safe, loving home. That's not anything to feel really grateful about. That's really the basics of what they deserve. And so that idea that they're going to come in and be grateful to you, is really not the case. And when you have that attitude of expecting that gratitude, you're probably going to be disappointed. And so it's good to be aware that this myth is not accurate. My child shouldn't love or feel loyal to an abusive parent. That one's kind of a hard one, I think, sometimes. We see and hear what these parents have done to their children, and it's pretty horrific sometimes. And yet these children still love their parents. And that's kind of the case for all of us. We've all had people that have hurt us, and probably not to the extreme that our children have been hurt, but we still love the person. That's the case a lot of times with our children. I've had one child that came to me that was, it was newsworthy. It was actually nationwide that how abusive the parent was. And just people were writing on about how parents should be killed, how they're the worst parents in the world, blah, blah, blah. And this child loved their parent. They loved their parent. They wanted to go back with them. They didn't care about what had happened. They loved their parent. And that's often the case of what you'll see. It's better just to move on, forget, and not talk about painful past experiences. That's kind of my dad's motto. He would prefer not to ever have to deal with feelings. But when we do that, the feelings just kind of seep out one way or the other. So the idea that you can just move on from this trauma that our kids have experienced and not really deal with it is not accurate. It just seems like it comes out one way or the other. And so we need to be able to work with them on these things. So what we're going to do, let's see, I'm going to stop sharing this screen. We're going to take a break here in a second, but I want you to get out your, whoops, not that one. I want you to get out your My Child worksheet, if you can, that first one. I'm going to pull it up here to show it to you. There you go. So it's, I think page 5, is it? Page 3. So MC3. If everyone can pull that out, that would be great. If you don't have it for whatever reason, it really is something that you can write it down on a blank piece of paper. And this is where we're going to take a break here for a second. And I'm going to give you a little bit longer in a break so you can complete this worksheet. What I want you to do, and keep in mind that we're going to use this child throughout the 4 weeks that we're talking. So make sure you have an idea of this child. It can be a child that you've had in care before. It can be a child that you have in care now. If you don't have children in care, it could be a child at school or the community, or just a child that you can be thinking about. Most times people have an idea of the child that they're going to be working on. If you have lots of children in your home that have experienced trauma, just pick one that you can kind of focus on for this as we're talking. What I'm going to want from you is if you can just write down what I know about my child's life before coming into my home and what I would like to know. And so if those 2 things you can do, and then we will come back at 10 o'clock on the dot. So that gives you 13 minutes, maybe 5 for a break and 8 to get this worksheet done. And if both of you can do it, that's really helpful, again, because I'd really like it to be personal and something that applies to your family and your life now. And I think this My Child worksheet helps with that. So we will continue to talk about this child throughout the week. So make sure as you're filling that out, you keep that in mind. Any questions about that before we take a break? Can everyone find it? No comments. So we must be all good or we must be all back asleep. Not sure. But I'm going to assume everyone's all good. So go ahead and fill this out and we'll come back at 10 o'clock. Thank you.
Hi, Amy. This worksheet says that it's secured and needs a password to edit.
That would be the slideshow. The worksheet shouldn't need a password, but if you just push read only, is there a spot for read only?
I'm just trying to be able to put answers in to edit it, and it says it has in brackets secured. RPC participant handbook, my child worksheet .pdf secured. And I clicked on edit and it's requiring a password.
So a lot of times people will have, so with you registered a little bit late, so I wasn't able to send you out a manual. I can do that this week later on if you'd like they actually get a paper manual as well. If you can just write this down on a piece of paper, that would be fine. And then we can give that to you later on.
Okay, and this is what we need to prove that we've been to the class, right?
Yes. So you can just, this is not the one that you'll need to prove that you've been to the class. These worksheets, this is just one that we'll be doing. Let me show you the ones that you'll need. I attached to the.
Yeah. There's only like 5 questions on the first one.
Yeah, there it is. I don't know if you can see that. These are the ones that you'll need to do to prove that you've been into the class.
Oh, okay.
So these, if you could just, those ones should be printed out. But if you can just write the My Child one on a blank piece of paper, that would be fine.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, well, maybe give it another minute and then everyone can come back and we can get started again. Okay, hopefully all of your houses are still standing and children are being fed and taken care of and enjoying. I know at least my kids are on electronics and enjoying the heck out of that. So hopefully everyone's okay there. We are going to I feel like I've been talking a lot. So this is the part where I'm going to expect a little bit more participation from y'all. So hopefully you're ready, woken up enough. Hopefully everyone had a chance to fill out the worksheet. Any questions or concerns there? Nope. Great. So what does the word trauma mean? Anyone that wants to can jump in here. What does trauma mean to you? How would you define it? Yeah, Phil.
I would say typically negative experiences that impact behavior.
I like that. Negative experience, typically negative experiences that impact behavior. Great. Thank you very much. Anybody else?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking along those same lines, like feelings and emotions that then cause behaviors caused from typically a negative experience that then, kind of create that lasting effect.
I like that you both have linked the two. You've linked this experience with the behavior. And I think that's really key to what we're going to be talking about. Anyone else have any other ideas? As I said, we're going off this National Child Traumatic Stress Network. It's the whole curriculum that they've done. So we go based on their definition, which pretty much includes the two that you guys have already mentioned, the combined one that you mentioned. What their definition is it's a traumatic experience that threatens the life or physical integrity of a child or someone that's important to them. So a parent, child, grandparent, sibling. And I think that's important to note. Sometimes in domestic violence situations, you may not have a child that their own life is threatened, but someone else is. And so that's why they would be still considered a very traumatic experience. Also, it causes an overwhelming sense of terror, helplessness, and horror. I think that for me, for the trauma experiences that I've had in my life, that feeling of out of control and helplessness is the hardest part of it for me. I like to be in control in general, and feeling like I have no power and just watching something horrific happen before me is very difficult. And then, and this is kind of what you guys were talking about, that physical effect or the behavior that we'll experience after produces intense physical effects such as pounding heart, rapid breathing, trembling, dizziness, or loss of bladder or bowel control. So we're going to have three parts of trauma, basically, from their definition. It threatens the life of ourselves or someone we love. You feel out of control, and there's an intense physical reaction. So those are the three parts of the trauma or their definition of a traumatic experience. There are different types of trauma as well. All of us, well, most of us, I would imagine, have had acute traumas in our life, car accidents or single events that last a limited time. some examples of that. Do you guys have any good examples? Car accident is the one that first comes to my mind. Anyone else of acute trauma?
I wouldn't say this is necessarily a big trauma, but we moved 4 times growing up. So that was always kind of, when was the next time we were going to move kind of thing. And it was always like across the country. So that was kind of a thing growing up for me.
That is a trauma, absolutely, especially depending upon your age as well. That could be a trauma, that moving. Thank you. That's a good example. Anyone else? Perhaps bullying, I was thinking, could be another one if it's just a one-time thing. Maybe acute. Acute is just that one single event that happens for a limited time, and that's how they define that. And children will often gauge the seriousness of this by the parent's adult's response. Acute trauma could be like a natural disaster too. If it was an earthquake or tornado or something like that, they will gauge how serious it is based upon their parents' reaction. They take a lot of their cues from us. And so that's how they're going to tell. A chronic trauma is a little bit different. It's the experience of multiple traumatic events, often over a period of long time. So this would be what a lot of our children experience with abuse. Maybe it's physical abuse that happens over and over. Domestic violence sometimes would be that. You know, maybe the moves even could be that. If there's mental illness, they could attribute to chronic trauma, mental illness of the parents, mental illness of the child, anything like that that experiences multiple traumatic events over a long period of time. Those would be things. I have a big enough screen. Here we go. I had a chat here. Let me see real quick. Okay, the other, or there may be a particular event that stands out as well. So, and the effects of trauma are going to build up. So as these experiences happen over multiple times, that feeling is going to build up, and those effects are going to get stronger or more significant as time goes by. Another type of trauma that we may not think about is neglect. The definition of neglect is not doing anything to a child, right? So a lot of times people don't think of neglect as being abuse or as being traumatic, because basically with neglect, we're just not doing anything. However, failure to provide for a child's basic needs has been proven to be very traumatic for a child, especially for our younger children who have nobody else to depend upon to provide those needs for them. And so that just the act of not doing anything can actually cause trauma for a child. It could be perceived as a trauma by an infant or young child, completely dependent upon the adults for care. So those younger children are going to experience that as trauma more significantly. And it opens the door to other traumatic events. So when you have a child that's neglected, they're likely going to have other trauma as well. That could look like physical abuse, that could look like domestic violence, that could look like mental illness in the home, but it's going to open the door to additional traumatic events as well. And then neglect in and of itself may reduce a child's ability to recover from trauma. So I had a child that came into our home. He was 3 years old, and they thought he had severe special needs. I used to be a special education teacher prior to being a mom. And so they placed him in my home because they thought he was going to have a lot of special needs. He couldn't walk across the floor, across the room without falling down. He just constantly fall down. He had bruises everywhere. He talked in a really robotic voice. I like pizza. You know, he didn't have the normal connotations and voice inflections that you would have. He just really seemed to have some significant delays. Well, come to find out that he had spent the first 3 years of his life in a playpen. He really wasn't interacted with at all. In fact, his only interaction was the television which is how he learned to talk. And so that's why he had that kind of odd voice going on. He'd never been allowed to really explore. And so that's why he hadn't learned how to walk. When he was given all those opportunities, he was fine. It took a long time. It's not something that happened overnight by any means. But turns out that he didn't have any significant special needs. It was just the neglect that he experienced from being in a playpen for 3 years that caused him to have all of these effects. And so he didn't experience any physical abuse. There was some trauma related to not being fed, but there was no abuse per se. It was the neglect. His mother would get high, and then when she was high, she was off partying and being with friends. And then when she would crash, she was sleeping on the couch. So his needs were not being met in any significant way. And that caused him to have a lot of problems as a result. So neglect can be a traumatic experience in and of itself, and can lead to quite a significant amount of trauma additional. So the term complex trauma is what we use to describe a specific kind of chronic trauma and its effects on children. This is multiple traumatic events that begin at a very young age. And it's caused by adults who should have been caring and protecting the child. I think that's one of the ones that we need to focus on the most, is that it's caused by the adults that are in their lives that should have been the ones protecting them and caring for them, which is why that complex trauma comes in. If it happened by someone else per se, a stranger on the street or someone that they weren't as familiar with, the trauma wouldn't be as significant as what we're talking about here. But because it was someone that they depend on for survival, that trauma is a little bit more complex and a little bit more significant that these children have gone through. So the different types of neglect that we've talked about: acute, chronic, complex, and neglect. When you're looking at your My Child activity on there, I think it's, let me get to it, sorry. You can pull up that My Child 4, I believe it is. Let me stop sharing and pull it up on my screen here. The My Child, so I believe it's page 4. We're going to just take a second and see what they've had. What would you say your child's experience with trauma has been? That first thing, has it been more acute, more chronic, more neglect? What has been their trauma that they've experienced right there? What has most of your children, what do you see with the children that you're working with?
I would say mine is probably more chronic.
Chronic?
Is that what you're asking? Yeah, just
yeah. Why do you feel that?
it was just kind of their lifestyle, their whole life. Like they had been in care, then reunited, and then back into care to us. And they were 7, so it had been 7 years of just kind of chronic drug abuse. And anyway,
that reunited and coming back into your home, I think that causes so much trauma. I hate that. I just think that adds to.
Well, they were with a different family before. We didn't meet them until they were pulled out again.
Even harder.
Yeah.
That would be so extremely difficult. I can't imagine how children handle that. So I would definitely agree with you. That would be more chronic. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Anyone else with thoughts there?
Yeah, my kids would, well, the 2 I have now, they would be, I feel, more complex trauma. They came to me, oh, careful, don't get you see this. They came to me at 6 months and a year and a half, but even at those young ages, they had spent, my baby had spent his whole life in a car seat. So he literally couldn't even hold his own neck up at 7 months old. He had no muscle at all. And then my daughter was a lot like your child. You were explaining, she could barely walk. She was completely still like nonverbal. She was more at the age of like a 6-month-old. And then when they weren't with their mom, she would leave them for days on end. She had addiction problems. And so they'd be left for days on end with strangers, were abused by different people. So yeah, a lot in just a few years of their life.
So a couple things that you were talking about, that neglect led to that additional abuse by being with strangers and who knows what happening. And that's often the case as well. A lot of times as foster parents, we may not have a lot of information about what exactly happened to our child, but we may see a 3-year-old that can't walk, or, you know, your child that you were talking about that struggles with the basics, or that's at a very, very younger developmental age. And just from that, we can tell that there's been probably complex trauma in their life. Even though we don't know the details, it's very easy to infer that. Thank you for sharing. That sounds incredibly hard for those little ones. Anyone else with experience with their child's trauma?
I would say with our child, there's some neglect. She has some big food attachment issues where she can't, if other people are eating around her, at least when she first came with us, when other people were eating around her, she couldn't stop eating until she was just way over bloated and felt like sick and threw up. So she wasn't fed properly growing up and had times where she said she didn't eat for days.
And to me, that's one thing that I think the general public doesn't understand, is how significant of a trauma neglect can be. Because you just think, oh, well, nothing's happening to them, so how bad can that be, right? Neglect, I think, can be one of the most harmful things to our children overall, which is really hard to watch. Thank you all for sharing. How children respond to all this trauma that we just talked about. Long-term trauma can interfere with healthy development and affect a child's. Sorry, it's not letting me. Let me stop sharing again and see if I can pull it up. Sorry, it's not letting me move forward now. Oh, there we go. Can you guys see that? Is it moving forward? Okay. So long-term trauma can affect a child's development and affects a child's ability to trust others, sense of personal safety, ability to manage emotions. Some of this is stuff that you guys just talked about when you were telling about what type of trauma your child has experienced, ability to navigate and adjust to life changes, and physical and emotional response to trauma. Chronic trauma or complex trauma can actually change the child's brain waves, pathways. And we're going to talk a lot about this. Like I said, there's a lot of research out right now that explains what trauma does to the brain. And I think it's important that we note that it actually changes the brain. It causes brain damage. I always like to, couple that with the fact that just like trauma can change brain, so can loving, consistent parenting. But I think we have to give that trauma the impact that it deserves and recognize that it does cause brain damage. And so we need to be aware of that and what that's going to look like for our child. A child's reaction to trauma will vary depending on the age and developmental stage of the child, their temperament, perception of the danger faced, trauma history. So if they've had a lot of experiences in the past that have been traumatic, adversity faced following the trauma. So sometimes people can have one acute trauma in their lives and they can pretty much get over it and it doesn't continue to impact them the rest of their lives. But if they've had additional adversities after the trauma, then that can add to how much it will impact them. And then really significant here is the availability of adults who can offer help, reassurance, and protection. So we've all heard that it just takes one, right? One caring adult can change a world for a child. And this is very true. It's not just change the world, but change how they perceive and deal with trauma in their life. If they have one person that they can kind of count on and can offer that protection for them, then that will change how they respond to trauma. So I know, like I mentioned, sometimes my biological children have experienced trauma, whether it's natural disasters or moves or accidents. And they've been very traumatic experiences. But because they've had me to kind of be there as offering reassurance and support, they haven't necessarily had trauma that's impacted them significantly throughout their lives. A lot of our children in care do not have that person that they can rely on, that they can count on. And so therefore it's going to impact them more significantly. There's different ways that children respond to trauma. That's that hyperarousal, meaning that they're very nervous, jumpy, quick, startled quickly. We just had a child in care that every single noise that happened downstairs, and it was a house he was unfamiliar with, but every single noise, he was sure that someone was coming to get him. He had experienced a lot of domestic violence. And so everything that happened, what was that? Who's coming in? What are they doing? He was just so jumpy, just expecting that next trauma, the next thing that was going to happen to him. It took months for him not to jump every time the downstairs door opened. And it was really hard to watch him just be so hyper aroused, waiting for the next trauma to happen to him. They could also have experiences where they re-experience the trauma, whether that's at night when they're having bad dreams, or during the day even. Those intrusive images can just come through, and they constantly re-experiencing the trauma that they've had, which can cause additional trauma, obviously. And it keeps, when I should say, this is not something they control necessarily either. They just keep coming uncontrollably into the mind. Young children, we talked about I think it was Tommy before, how he brought that into his play. He, constantly, the police would come trying to protect the person. They couldn't protect the person. So a lot of times you'll see our young kids bring this trauma into their play, and that's how they'll re-experience the trauma. And that's how they're trying to make sense of the trauma. That's why play therapy can be really helpful for those younger children, because this is the way that they're trying to understand what happened to them. I know I've had kids, like, we've just pretty much taken, like, I was never a big Barbie fan anyhow, but we just pretty much had to take Barbie out of our world because there was some re-experiencing and reenacting trauma that wasn't healthy for our children. And I've experienced that a lot with children in foster care, that they will just try to recreate those experiences that happened to them. And I find it's much better for them to do that in a therapeutic environment rather than at my house with other children around. So we've just taken some certain toys out of our home so that we don't have to have those experiences. Not that we don't want them to relive them, and not that we don't want them to deal with that, but that we want them to have that happen in a therapeutic environment. Another thing could be avoidance or withdrawal. I see that's a lot with our teenagers that we've had come into care. They'll come in and they'll be in their room, and that's the last time I'll see them until I force them out of their room to come and eat, or, to go to school. They kind of just come in and shut down. I think that's a kind of a typical teenage response to a lot of things, but especially with our teenagers that have experienced trauma. This feeling of numb, they'll separate from normal life. They'll pull away from activities that they once enjoyed and from other relationships that they enjoyed. And then they'll start avoiding things that prompt memories of the trauma. So if it was a certain place or certain people, they'll just avoid those things altogether. Rather than having to feel those hard emotions, they'll just kind of try to turn off all their emotions, which can be beneficial for a while. I think our teenagers and our kids have a lot to deal with when they're coming into foster care. So sometimes it's good that they're not dealing with it all at once. But as I mentioned in the myths before, eventually it's going to seep out. Eventually those feelings are going to have to come out in one way or the other. I had a teenager that was so nothing's wrong. What her parents didn't bother her. There was nothing, she was just fine. And no matter how I tried to talk to her, it didn't matter. She was fine. And DCFS recommended that she go to therapy. She did not need therapy. And she was not going to talk to that therapist. And she held her line pretty hard for the whole entire 6 months that she had to meet with that therapist, because there was nothing wrong with her. There was nothing wrong with her parents. There was nothing wrong with her. However, one day it was something so minor, I don't even remember what it was. Just someone had done something and really, truly very minor. And she got so upset. She threw her phone and cracked it and broke it. She threw things around her room. She just was yelling and screaming over this really minor infraction. And I just thought, this has nothing to do with what you're yelling and screaming about, and has everything to do with how you're feeling inside. So even though she wasn't willing to talk about those feelings and wasn't willing to deal with those, they came out. And we had to deal with them one way or the other. And so that's often the case. I don't know, have any of you experienced any of these responses, either the avoidance or the hyperarousal, re-experiencing? Have any of you guys had experiences that way that you want to share?
This is Madison Logan, by the way. I feel like, wow, you did so good cleaning up your room. I feel like we've seen improvement in the kids that we have in our house, because they were in a previous home, and their previous home had a lot of their triggers. And so when they would come here for respite, because we had them for respite before we decided to try and get them to come long-term from the home they were in, we saw some of the behaviors, but we didn't see all of them. But our honeymoon phase was the respite.
Mm-hmm.
So then they came to us and they opened themselves up and shared some of the big emotions that they were feeling. And we have kind of younger kids. And so it's been a little bit of a change to be able to figure out whether what they're doing is because of trauma or the change, and there's so many things that it could be. But I feel like we've had a lot of improvement with like fits. Like someone would throw a gigantic fit over something that to me, it didn't seem like a big deal, but because of trauma they'd had, I understood that they were upset about it in a real way. And so we worked with them to understand that it was hard for them. And then they usually say that they missed their parents or something. And then I'd ask them what their parents would do in that moment that would help them. And that usually was fairly effective to help them to breathe and to know that we were there for them. And like I said, we've seen some improvement. We still see trauma, but yeah.
And I think you brought up a question that a lot of times I have, at least, if not all of us have, is what is this? Is this because of the trauma? Is this because of the move? Is this because of just normal child development? It can be so many different things. In my experience, I've just gone with, let's just say it's because of trauma, because it's going to make me a better parent. I'm going to deal with it in a better, more appropriate way if I just assume that. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, which happens. But if I just assume that it's because of trauma, then I handle it in a way that I feel better about, and that I think is more helpful to my child. But that's great that you're seeing improvement. And I think that's what we need to remember, is that with time, with consistency, with providing that safe environment for them to have these big emotions, it does get better. There are going to be times where they have reminders of things. So things, events, situations, places, sensations, smells, are even people. A child can connect with a traumatic event. The perfect example I had of this was, I had a very young child. I think she was only 3 at the time. And our cemetery is right in the middle of town. So we drive by it pretty much to do anything. And every time I would drive by the cemetery, and I didn't really recognize this at first because I didn't connect the dots, she would start having fits. She would throw her cup, she would start screaming, she would try to hit who was next to her. There's lots of little things. And I just was like, she is really, really hard to travel with. She just does not do well when I have to go in errands. That's kind of what I thought, is that she's just really doesn't like to be in the car. Well, later on, I happened to read something that had happened to her at the cemetery that was incredibly traumatic. And it made sense. It started clicking to me that every time we drove by the cemetery is when we started having these problems. It wasn't necessarily that we were running errands that was the problem. It was when I would drive by the cemetery that was the problem. Once I could clue into that, and obviously she was nonverbal, so she couldn't explain that to me. But once I was given the information I needed, I learned how to not drive by the cemetery. It was a really easy thing to avoid. A lot of times we're not going to be able to clue into that. We're not going to know what it is that's triggering our child. And that's what makes it really hard, in my opinion. We kind of have to be a little bit of a detective in figuring out what the trauma reminders are for our child, and then trying to figure out how we can help them. Sometimes it is a matter of avoiding. With a 3-year-old, it was a very easy thing to avoid. Sometimes it's things that we can't avoid, but just being aware that they're trigger reminders and that they're going to bring up some trauma can be really helpful to us. And so we want to just try to be aware of when these reminders take place. Anniversaries of moving into a home or adoption anniversaries, those can be big trauma reminders. Mother's Day. Oh, I hate Mother's Day. I was never a fan of Mother's Day prior, but when I've had children that I've been adopted, I really hate Mother's Day. I've never had a nice one yet. I'm still hoping, but Mother's Day can be a huge one when they have all the trauma of their mother that they're not with anymore, and then the trauma and then my expectations of Mother's Day, that can be a big trauma reminder. So just being aware of our children and what their reminders are. And you may have a young child that you think, oh, well, they don't remember when they came to live with us, but they may remember the season. So when it starts turning colder, they're thinking, oh, this is about the time I was removed. Their body does remember. There's a great book called The Body Keeps Score that talks about how our body does remember these memories, even when we're little. And so even though you may think they're too little to have these trauma reminders, they very much can. Smells. When I smell bread cooking, it reminds me of my grandmother, and it's a great reminder. I, love my grandma very, very much. And so anytime I smell bread, I think of her. Our kids have similar things. A certain smell may remind them of a traumatic event. And so just being aware that even though they were young, they still could have these trauma reminders. With these reminders, they could experience re-experiencing withdrawal or disassociation. There's a quote here that says, I don't think there was a time when I wasn't abused as a child. In order to survive the abuse, I may believe that the real me was separated from my body. That way, the abuse was happening not really to me, but just to the skin I am in. This would be a really good example of that disassociation that we were talking about, because it was just too hard to deal with the abuse that they were going through. They just kind of disassociated and went away. Our kids handle trauma in lots of different ways. And our brain is a fascinating thing. I kind of get excited when I talk about the brain because I really love learning about the brain and how amazing it is. Our brain is designed to keep us alive. That's why, throughout the years and ages, we've been able to stay alive and some other species have not, because our brain is evolved and the whole intent of our brain is to keep us alive. And so sometimes we'll see behaviors in our children that are survival skills that are really annoying to us. But the reason why they have them is because the brain is trying to keep them alive. And so our brain teaches us, okay, if there's danger, run away from it. Or maybe if there's danger, we need to freeze or we need to disassociate. Our brain is doing its job. The brain is doing their job with our children as well. It's helping our children stay alive. And some of those skills that they may learn are maladaptive in our homes because they don't need to focus on those survival skills quite as much as they did when they were in those other homes. And so when they bring those skills into our homes, they don't work for our homes because that's not a survival skill they need anymore. But we need to recognize that it is what kept our child alive thus far and recognize it for the survival skill that it is and how helpful it was to our child at the time. Just a real quick talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. We'll often hear that thrown around when we're talking about our children, which could be very much be the case because they've experienced this trauma. So that's post-traumatic stress disorder. That is diagnosed when a person displays severe trauma stress reactions. The reactions persist for a long time, and the reactions get in the way of a normal living life. PTSD was first studied with the military, so it's never really been studied very well with children yet, but they first started diagnosing it with the military. Bruce Perry, he's an author that really started looking about PTSD in children. He's written several amazing books, if you are interested. The Boy Who Was Raised a Dog, Born for Love. Those are some of the good books that he's written. I think he just had another recent one out too, but I can't remember the name of it. But he talks about PTSD in children and how it affects them. So our children can have that diagnosis of PTSD if these conditions are met. The severe trauma responses, the reactions last for a long time, and the reactions get in the way of normal living life. What you may see with traumatic stress reactions is problems concentrating, learning or taking in information, difficulty going to sleep or staying asleep, nightmares, emotional instability, moody, sad, angry, aggressive, or age inappropriate behaviors, reacting like a much younger child. I went through a traumatic experience recently, and I had some of these things. They didn't last a long time, but I was so amazing to me that it was kind of like my brain was in a fog. I couldn't think through things that I could normally think through. As a mom that works, I usually have 20 things going in my brain all at once, and I'm pretty good at keeping it all organized and up there. After this traumatic event, and I was still, very recently after it, it was like it was a fog, and I couldn't think of more than one thing at a time. Even then, one thing was hard for me to concentrate on. I just couldn't make that next step. I couldn't make decisions very well. Like even just what I was going to eat for dinner, it was just like so overwhelming to me to think I had to decide what to eat for dinner. I very much had that difficulty going to sleep. I just could not, I was exhausted, but I could not fall asleep. That instability with my emotions. One second I was crying, the next second I was laughing, the next second I was yelling. It was just, my emotions were just kind of all over the place. It really helped me to have these feelings in myself, to see how our children could be responding. So sometimes when we have a kid that can't respond or can't concentrate in school, we may think, oh, they just don't even care about school, or oh, they're just not very smart, or oh, whatever the case may be, when it may be a trauma response. Maybe they're having a hard time concentrating because of all the trauma that they've experienced. My event was very acute, and I have lots of resources to deal with it, so I bounced back pretty quickly. Our kids are not this lucky. They're just not. And so sometimes that lack of concentration, sleeping, emotional instability, probably all of us have seen that, that can last for a long time because of a trauma response. When playing, young children who have been through a traumatic event may repeat part or all of the traumatic event, take on the role of the abuser, try out different outcomes, or get stuck on a particular moment. Like I already said, Tommy that we talked about earlier, he was playing with a police car and it kept getting hurt. And even though the foster father would try to get him past that, he was unable to he got stuck on that particular moment. And you'll see this a lot with your younger children. That's how they're dealing with the play therapy. And so that's why it's really helpful to get them in to see someone that can kind of help them get them unstuck from this. Seek professional help if your child, and I pause for a second here. Most of our kids that have been in foster care, they're going to be already seeing someone. which is great and helpful. So this may not apply, but if later on, maybe if you have a child that you've adopted and so you've taken them out of therapy for a while, and then some of this starts to come back up, this is when it would be helpful to you. So seek professional help if your child centers a lot of their play around traumatic events, becomes very upset during traumatic play, repeatedly plays the role of the abuser, or plays in a way that interferes with relationships with others. To me, the key one is that last one. When it starts to interfere with how they relate to their peers and relate to others, that's when I'm always looking for help, whether it be medical help or therapeutic help or outside help from me, is when I see that my children socially are not able to get along with peers. To me, that's a big red flag. All the other ones are really important too, but I just feel like that social interaction is so important for their self-esteem, for their development, that when that starts to become impacted, that's when I really want to step in and really take a more significant step to getting them help. So what you might see when they're talking about trauma is they're talking about certain events all the time. I've had some kids that's all they can talk about. And it gets kind of annoying to go over it and over and over it with them. They kind of become fixated on it, and that's all they want to talk about. Bring up the topic seemingly out of the blue. This can be a hard one when you're maybe at dinner table and then a child starts talking about some horrific abuse that they've experienced, and all the other children are now experienced trauma because they've all of a sudden had to deal with the child exposing or sharing all this information at once. So they can just kind of bring up this topic without even without being prompted at all. They can become confused or mistaken about the details. That happens a lot, especially with our younger children. They'll think certain people were there or it happened at a certain time. And it's not that the trauma didn't happen. It's more that they're just kind of confused about the details. We want to always believe our children when they talk to us and share things with us. That's not our role, is to find out if they're telling the truth or not. We want to believe them. But be aware that it's very normal and very typical for them to become confused or mistaken about details as they're sharing with us. They may remember only fragments of what happened. And they may avoid talking about anything remotely related to the traumatic event. And so they may not want anything to do with anything related to Halloween or anything related to their birth parents or that kind of stuff. They just want to avoid all of that altogether. And they can start focusing on feeling guilt and having a hard time accepting what happened as well. So talking about how this looks in our children. So we've talked about a lot of, I've used a lot of words. How this impacts our children though, like in the daily life that we're living with them. We talked about Maya at the beginning. She was the little girl that is living with her aunt because of physical abuse with her young mother. She was taken into care after her 17-year-old mother brought her to the ER unconscious with broken arms and bruises. Maya and her mother, Angela, had been living with her mother's abusive boyfriend. For a brief time recently, Angela and Maya had lived in a shelter for victims of domestic violence. And Angela claimed Maya was hurt while in the shelter. So Maya has a broken bone, and the mom is saying that happened while in the shelter. So given what we know about her trauma, these are some of the impacts or some of the ways that she expresses that trauma. She wakes up crying in the middle of the night. She's easily startled by loud noises. Whoops. Sorry, there we go. She squirms away from being held, doesn't make eye contact, screams when taking on medical visits. So when you look at her trauma that she's experienced, just the brief little bit that I told you about, why do you think some of these things are occurring? The waking up in the middle of the night, the squirming from being held. What are your thoughts here? what kind of trauma do you think she experienced? And then what are some of her responses? And why, I guess. So complex, chronic, acute.
It'd be chronic, right?
Yeah, I think so. Chronic and probably some complex too, because
Yeah, that's where I get confused a little.
yeah,
one
and
is-
that's, I mean, we're probably all going to have some of it. You know, we could have an acute event and then we could also have chronic trauma. But to me, it would be more complex here because it's more chronic and because it's someone that she's relying on to take care of her.
Okay.
So what do you think it is? You know, why is she avoiding the physical contact and the eye contact?
Because it probably brought pain before. Like she doesn't sound like she was cuddled or nurtured a whole lot. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. I think maybe eye contact and physical contact hurt before too. Not only did she not get it, but when she did get it sounded like it hurt. You know, if she's got broken bones and bruises, it sounds like it wasn't a pleasant experience to be held before. So her normal attachment process has been disrupted. Here we have Javier's story. He was the older boy that got in a fight. I think 14. He grew up seeing his parents battle, would try to divert his parents by making jokes. Mother refused to leave the father. He was taken into care after he tried to intervene during a fight and was badly beaten by his father. His response to trauma: he's not interested in school, jokes around in class, frequently skips school to smoke and drink with friends in nearby park, has sudden outbursts of violence, recently beat up a boy he saw pushing a girl. So again, given what you know about his trauma, why would you say he's having some of these behaviors?
I would say beating up the girl goes back to his childhood of trying to intervene between his mom and dad and trying to save the girl in the situation. Saving the victim is something, you know, he couldn't do maybe in his childhood, and so seeing it, you know, with someone his own age group, just trying to reenact that and try to save another victim.
That's exactly, reenact it. I think he's so our children, our younger children, relive that in their play. He's reliving it in actual life. Yes, thank you. What about that humor part of it, that being the class clown? I see that a lot with kids. If you noticed in the beginning, it said he used to use humor with his parents to try to diffuse the situation. And that's what got him some attention, some positive attention probably, right? And so now that he's in school, what's he doing? He's being the class clown again because he got positive attention for it before. It was a way for him to get out of, the focus not on him. I see that a lot with a lot of our kids, is just trying to divert that focus someplace else, either through humor or through big behaviors, so that other people are, not focusing on them and their feelings. They're just focusing on their behaviors or their jokings or all that kind of stuff. The other thing I would wonder about him is that because it has been chronic trauma and throughout so long of his life, I'm wondering if he had time to properly develop in the ways that he was supposed to. So there's certain times of our life that we're designed to learn certain things, social and emotional responses. There's a certain time, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. There's a certain time of our life to learn that. And if we're focused on self-preservation and survival skills, we don't have time to learn all the things that we're supposed to learn at those critical times. And so he might not have had an opportunity to learn how to handle his emotions in an appropriate way, just because he was more focused on survival skills. Anything else you guys see here?
Well, with the skipping school to smoke and drink, you're also seeing some avoidance.
Thank
He
you.
doesn't want to do things, so he's disconnecting and abusing substances to kind of get his mind somewhere else.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, because again, I see that a lot with teenagers, this avoidance. And it may be avoidance being in their room, or like you just mentioned, it may be avoidance by using substances. I think a lot of our parents that we work with are avoiding things by using substances, whether that's mental illness, whether that's just feelings. I think substances gets in the mix because of something. And so often it is avoidance. So thank you. That's a really good point. We're going to, let's see what time we got here. Almost perfect time again. So I'm going to stop sharing here real quick because I want you to pull out your My Child activity again, My Child worksheet, if I can get to it. Nope, not that one. Sorry, I have too much on my screen here. Oh, here we go. Okay, so we've already filled out that first part, my child's trauma and losses. You know, well, and you might not have filled out all of their traumas, but whether it's chronic or complex, that kind of stuff. But I want you to take a little bit of time now, and we'll do the same thing we did before. We'll take a break till 11 o'clock. But I want you to fill out these parts of MC 5. If you look on MC6, it can kind of help you as well, because it gives you a lot of ideas of trauma that they could have experienced. You may not know ages. You may not know if they've experienced some of this trauma, but it gives you some ideas. And so you can fill out these 3 sections. My child's trauma and losses. So see what some of their traumas could have been. What has been your child's reaction to trauma? And then this, actually don't fill out this last part. The last part we're going to save for the next section. So just fill out those 2 parts right there about your child's reaction to trauma and your child's trauma and losses. And then we will come back at 11 o'clock. Okay, we'll give it about 30 more seconds if everyone wants to come back. Okay, so anything about that worksheet that you guys maybe learned about your child that you want to share, or questions that you have about their experience with trauma? Did anyone learn anything maybe that you haven't thought about before about how your child responds to trauma? I know in the past it's helped me when I looked at, maybe them not having food, then I've been able to say, okay, maybe this is a response to trauma. Or some of you brought up avoidance. Maybe that's a response to trauma that I never considered before. School concentration. A lot of times our kids will come with labels like ADHD or ADD. And when I learn more about trauma, I think, well, is it really ADHD or is it trauma? So that's where I'm wondering if anyone's had any aha moments of, maybe my kid does this behavior because of trauma.
So one of my twins, he's 10 right now. One thing we struggle with, not struggle, but the challenge is he just freezes. It's not necessarily when he's in trouble, but if you just ask him a question, he'll just like stare at you and like, you're not in trouble. I just want to know, like, just answer me. And he's very calculated about his response. So I don't know if he's always like in this fight or flight or freeze mode, like where he has to decide how to answer. I don't know if that's back to trauma or not. If just how he is, like how his brain works. I don't know. That's one I've always been curious about because it's a very frustrating to me when I just need an answer. I don't want to just you staring at me.
Oh my goodness. I feel you on so many levels on this one. I have a child that does this too. And I could be asking the most mundane question and it's frozen. I'm not even mad. Like I'm lowering my voice. I do all the right things and I feel you. And yes, I think it can be responsive trauma, very much so. And my son has fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So I also think that plays into it. I don't know about your child, but I think that what we'll learn is some of our responses to trauma doesn't make sense. So you and I know that our home is safe and that we provide a safe environment for our child, but in their mind doesn't compute is as a safe environment. I think it is in lesson 3 that we talk about creating a safe place. So we'll talk about that a little bit more, other than for me to say, oh my goodness, I get you. I feel you, Jennifer. That is one of the hardest behaviors for me because I can deal with temper tantrums, but when I don't get anything from you, like, what are we supposed to do here now? So I get it. So we'll have to work together, I guess. I have no solution because it still drives me up the wall, but I do think it's trauma response. And I do think providing that safe place does help. So we'll talk about it a little bit more.
Okay. And it's funny you mentioned ADD or ADHD too, because we are treating him just in he just started maybe 2.5 weeks ago on some medication. The doctor wanted to see if that would help with some other things because he does kind of fall right into all the classic ADHD just stems and stuff that he has. I don't know. But anyway, in my mind, I'm pretty sure it's more trauma related, but I'm hoping this still helps. I don't know what because there's not like major behaviors or anything. It's just this focus and being able to answer very simple questions and stuff.
Yeah.
Without taking so long. Anyway.
And that's really great insight. And I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with treating the ADHD because whether it comes because of actual ADHD or because of trauma, the how you're treating it is somewhat similar. Sometimes it's going to need medication. Sometimes it's going to need those fidget toys or just extra time at school. So the treatment doesn't necessarily change once you realize what's causing it. But I do again, I can't stress it enough. my attitude towards it changes when I realize that it's coming from trauma versus a little boy that just won't follow directions type of thing, or just won't answer me. Like, how hard is it? Just answer me. As you could tell today, I'm a talker. Like, how hard can it be to talk? I do it all day long. And so I can get frustrated if I'm just thinking he's just refusing to talk. If I see it as a trauma response, I can get more compassionate and patient. So anybody else with any thoughts there? Thank you for sharing, Jennifer. Just so I don't feel so alone, if nothing else.
Yeah, I was gonna say my little girl is like that too, where I'll just ask her like something simple, like, "Oh, did you sleep good?" Just like in the morning, like, "Oh, how did you sleep? Did you sleep good?" And if she doesn't, it's almost as if she doesn't immediately know like what she thinks I want to hear, she just freezes and she'll just stare at me. And so one thing, because we had her in early intervention, she's aged out of that now, but one thing that they had suggested that we've noticed has helped a lot is, rather than just asking her, to give her like 2 options, like, "Oh, did you sleep good, or did you have a bad night?" And then she like takes the stress. Now she's looking at me, she's like, "What are you saying?" But it kind of takes the pressure off of her, so she could just answer. So we've noticed that's helped a lot, and then we've slowly kind of have done that less and less, to where now for the most of the time we can just ask her. But even now, sometimes I'll ask her that and I'll get that dead look, so then I'll rephrase it and kind of give her a couple options. And sometimes she'll even pick a 3rd option that I didn't say, but at least it just kind of takes that pressure off of her and kind of gets her like thinking. I don't know, but that's helped. So I don't know
Wonderful.
if that would help or not, but.
And just because we're talking about it, I'll let you guys know that, so my son was very little when he came, and he had a lot of domestic violence and just froze all the time. But because of, I believe, my change and how I responded to him, I will let you know that he went for a job interview yesterday, and he was so nervous, because just in general, he's a pretty shy kid anyhow, but he does still to this day, we've done a lot of the things that you've talked about. We've done some of the other things about creating safety and all those things that we're going to talk about, but he'll still do that freeze thing. So I was pretty nervous for him as well, having a job interview, which is pretty stressful in general for a 15-year-old. And he got the job. So there's hope. He was able to answer the questions. He was able to talk to the person, and he did a really great job. So just kind of keep that in mind, that there is hope. After
I wanted to chime in and add, we have a daughter who will get everything done that she needs to. She knows kind of step 1, step 2, step 3. We've worked really hard on doing that, but then she'll get kind of stuck where she will finish her task and sit and wait for us forever. It's like, she got dressed in the morning, she brushed her teeth, she is now sitting in the hallway, just sitting there, and we are still getting dressed, we're getting ready, and we've talked to her and we're like, "What do you feel like you could do?" And we've given her options of what she can do. "You can go read a book now if you're waiting for us. You can go set the table if you want to for breakfast." Like, giving her things that you don't have to sit and wait for us to tell you what to do next. And I don't know how to help her find that directive of saying, like, "Oh, I can do this," or "I can do this." Like, even free time or anything that's not step, like, "We're going to do this activity, we're going to do this activity, we're going to do this activity." She'll just wait, do nothing. She has to be like told to do stuff and activities.
And that would be difficult. I would wonder if that's just, and how old is she?
She's 8.
Okay, I was going to say 7, but I wasn't positive. So 7, 8. You know, a lot of times our kids learn certain skills, or they're supposed to learn certain skills at different ages. And because they were experiencing trauma, which was what we talked about, because they were experiencing trauma, they didn't learn them. So they may not have learned how to play by themselves and how to do more self-directed play and leisure time and just choose something to do. So it might be a matter of you going back to kind of more that 4 or 5-year-old age, when that's kind of what you would be learning, is kind of how to play in your room for a second with the teddy bears by yourself. She was probably focused more on those survival skills that we talked about. And so she may just not have learned how to do that. And so giving her a minute to play by herself and then coming in and positively praising her for being able to do that. Then giving her 2 minutes, or giving her those options that they talked about. So right now you can go do this or this. And so giving her an opportunity to know, it sounds like she really wants to be successful, because having the problem of her getting all of her things done, that's a great problem to have, right? I'd love that problem. But I can see where it comes in that she doesn't know what to do after. So just because you're saying that she really wants to complete the task that you've given her, to me, that shows that she really wants your approval. She really wants to be successful, and she may just not know how to be successful next. So when you've given her tasks, she knows what to do. She can accomplish those, but she's not sure how to get your approval and be successful next. And so that might just be something that you have to go back and teach her. Sorry, tongue-tied. Teach her, because maybe she didn't learn it at the level that she was supposed to learn it at. I don't know. What do you, does that feel like something that would be helpful to her?
I definitely feel like that could be helpful. And I have recognized some things in her trauma and like her history of things were really hard. It's also hard because you said kind of playing by herself. There is really good thing that she'll do by herself. But even when she's with other people and observing them, she'll kind of sit back and observe them, and they'll ask her to play, or she'll even ask kind of to play. And then she's kind of like, no, I don't want to do that. And she'll just still sit there. But I definitely like the ideas of like giving her a little more options, or telling her kind of the next thing she could do every time until she's able to work up to the next task.
And I think it's really hard because we have 8-year-olds that we look at and we think, well, you're 8, you should know how to do this. And I know you're really good about this, but I do it myself. I'll look at my 12-year-old with fetal alcohol exposure and I'll think, well, you're 12, you should be able to follow a 3-step direction with no problem, right? But chronologically, they may be 12, developmentally, they may not. And that again is a response to trauma. If they're focused on survival, they're not going to catch those normal, typical developmental stuff. And so we just need to remember that although we may be looking at chronologically an 8-year-old or 12-year-old, we're technically looking at a 4-year-old and really taking it down to that level. Which I
yes, I have to remind myself all the time of that. I'm like, okay, she's 8, but in this area, she's kind of 2. She's almost 4, in different ways of just trying to help her.
Yeah, and that's really good. And remembering that it's a trauma response. What we're going to kind of shift gears and talk about now, which I think is really helpful, is that not only have they developed some skills that are maladaptive for our home, they've also developed some resiliency. And we talk about this a lot. You hear kids are resilient, kids can survive. And they can, absolutely. I'm amazed at what my kids have survived and gone through and are still kicking and still alive. I think all the time, I could never have gone through what they've gone through and still be as successful and happy as they are. So kids are resilient. When we're saying that, we also need to recognize that trauma still impacts our children. So as resilient as they may be, they're still impacted by trauma. When we're talking about resiliency, it's the ability to recover from traumatic events. Children who are resilient see themselves as safe, capable, lovable. And so when we have a child that we're trying to build resiliency in, we want to help them feel these 3 things. We want to help them feel safe, capable, and lovable. And we're going to talk about that as we go along. We want to provide that safety. We want to give them opportunities for success so they feel that they're more capable of accomplishing things. And we want them to know that they're lovable regardless of the behaviors or the feelings that they're having. And that helps build that resiliency in children. This is a quote from a Holocaust survivor. It says, just as despair can come to one only from other human beings, hope too can be given to one only by other human beings. I love this quote. Her entire family was in a concentration camp. And she's a peace activist now. And she just talks about how we can give hope. And as I mentioned, I hate going to trainings where I go away feeling like there is no hope, that damage has been done to my child that I can't change. And so I don't want us to leave on that note. I want you to know that there is hope, that just as trauma has impacted our child's brain, so can loving, consistent parenting. Factors that can increase resiliency in our children include a strong relationship with at least one competent, caring adult. We've talked about that. If you ever want to watch YouTube, if you just Google Josh Shipp, SHIPP, he talks about that. He was in foster care, and he talks about how important one person was in his life in changing his whole trajectory of his life. And so I encourage you to, if you have 5 seconds, to Google him, because that one person can make a difference. Feeling connected to a positive role model or mentor can help with resiliency. Having talents, abilities nurtured and appreciated. So often I see our kids, especially when I get a level 3 child in care, everyone, the caseworker, the teachers, the previous foster parents are all focused on the big emotions and feelings and behaviors that the child is experiencing. And sometimes that is overwhelming. They are taking up all of our time to deal with shoplifting and to deal with lying and to deal with fighting at school. And so often their talents and their abilities have kind of not been the focus for a really long time. And so one thing that I really like to do is start taking the focus off the behaviors and the big feelings and start focusing on all their amazing abilities. Because just as they may have some really hard behaviors, I can promise you every child that I've had come in my home also has some really amazing abilities and talents. And so when I start focusing on those and letting the other behaviors and feelings, go to the wayside, and definitely I'm still having to show up at the school to deal with the fights, and I'm still going to Walmart to deal with the shoplifting. But I'm also taking time to notice their artwork, or I'm taking time to notice how, really good they can skateboard. Because once they see good in them, that can increase, that can go more. And so when we start taking the focus off their behavior and on some of their unique special talents, that can be really helpful for increasing resiliency. Feeling some control over one's life, so important for our children in foster care. So much is out of their control, that anything that we can give to give them some control back is helpful. And we can do that even with the young children. A lot of you are talking about having young children in your home. You can do that with, do you want the pink cup or the orange cup? Do you want to wear the white shirt or the pink shirt? Do you want to take a bath before we read a bedtime story or after? Anything that you can do to give control. Now, when we're talking about teenagers, we want to make sure that we're giving them control over things that we're okay with them having control over. It may not be giving them control over curfew or maybe some friends, but it is giving them control over, okay, do you want to do homework now or do you want to do it later? Do you want, maybe you can't go hang out with those friends at their house, but maybe I can take you to the skate park and we can hang out, or they can come here and we can have pizza. Let them have some control over their lives. That, I know how much it helps me. As I mentioned, one of the hardest parts for me in any traumatic experience is the lack of control. And so I think that's the same thing for our children. So anytime we can give them that control back is helpful. Excuse me. And then having a sense of belonging to a community group or a cause larger than oneself. If that's volunteering, if that's a church group, if that's a school group, just that feeling of belonging to something else, that not everything is about them, that they can be impactful in their community, in their church, in their schools. That gives them that feeling of being capable when they can volunteer their time and impact the world around them. It also helps them connect them to something. And so it helps build that resiliency. Serving a cause greater than themselves can be really healing. You'll often hear that if you're struggling, then serve other people. And it's not just something that, that parents teach. It's something that's been proven to really be helpful and can help with resiliency. So recognizing some resiliency in the children that we've already talked about. So Maya, talked about her quite a bit. She's the little baby that had some physical abuse by her young mother. Some signs of resiliency in Maya is her ability to express her need through crying. She's still doing that. That's wonderful, right? I have lots of babies that come to me that don't express that need anymore. One time I had a little 2-year-old boy. He got cut by scissors. Not fun for a foster parent, I know. And I had to take him in to get stitches. And all the doctors and nurses were saying, oh, how amazing. He's so wonderful. He's so brave. Isn't this great? He's not crying. We just love that he's not crying. I thought, that's sad. That's not amazing. 2-year-olds should be screaming bloody murder when they have to get stitches. And the fact that he's not crying doesn't make him brave. It's just he's learned there's no point to crying. Mandy, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just want to talk about how much resilience has helped, and like focusing on what they're doing good has helped decrease the hard. Like, because ours will have, like I said earlier, they'd have really big emotions of tantrums over very little things. We've only had them for a month and a half, so it's not like we've really had them for a very long time, but we had them for respite before. But these kids, when they would freak out, they wouldn't want any connection, anything. But we've really tried to focus on, wow, you were really helpful. Thank you for doing this. Telling them when what they're doing is nice, telling when they've been helpful, tell them when they have done it the right way. So, and then they know that they can do it the right way the next time because we've told them what behaviors are helpful. You're gonna eat in here? Okay, cool. So there's a lot of different things that we've seen be helpful because of that. And I think that's a big contributor to our lower level of upsets, or maybe not lower level yet, but less frequent.
I thank you so much for sharing, because I agree with that. And I mean, any parenting program will tell you that you praise the behavior you want to see more of. So anytime you give attention to the behaviors that you want to see, kids crave attention. And so anytime you want to see more of a behavior, praise it. And I love that you tie it into trauma, because I think that's really important. We just have to look past some of those bigger behaviors and look for the good. And with some kids, it's been hard for me to look for the good. I have really had to really stretch myself because they're just out and about to have all that, they have a lot of trauma. And so we found a little bit of good, and then we build on that little bit of good, and then we build on a little bit more. And anytime that we praise that, it's been helpful to them. So thank you so much for your comment. Any other comments? If I'm missing anything, I love people to share. Other things with resiliency with Maya, she's able to take comfort from her bottle. So again, that's showing that she is still able to get comfort. It's through an object, which is not exactly what we'd like to see. We prefer to see it through a person, but she's able to get comfort, which is important. So she has that resiliency skill. She responds positively to music and has learned she can rely on it. And she's beginning to trust and enjoy being with her aunt. I also like how Mandy said we may not see it diminish, but we're seeing the frequency kind of, not as often. We need to remember that this is going to take time. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. And so I really like that you mentioned that they've only been in your home for a month and a half. And so we're going to have to, this beginning to start to trust and enjoy people. We're going to have to be patient as we see the trauma work itself through the child and through their experiences. As Maya's needs have consistently been met, she has started to learn that the world is safe and adults can be trusted. And so this resiliency that she already has is being built upon, which is wonderful. When we talk about the teenage boy, some resiliency factors that you might see in him is he's attached and loyal to his mother. So that's wonderful that you have a child that's attached. As we all know, attachment issues can cause a lot of problems in our children. So the fact that he's attached to his mother is a wonderful skill. He's talented. He's funny. He can entertain. Wonderful skill for children to have. It really helps them socially. He has formed friendship with his peers. So he can form those friendships. That's important as well. He has a sense of justice and wants to make things right in the world. I have a child that experienced significant trauma before we adopted him, and he is out to right every wrong in the world. He is that one that's always going to be fighting for the underdog. It's gotten him in trouble in the past. He's kind of been like this young man that he's gotten to fights, but it's also been one of the parts that I'm most proud of him about. You just cannot pick on another child in front of him without him coming to their defense. And he does it in a very loyal, not always appropriate, but very loyal, wonderful way of not wanting to see anyone else hurt. And I love seeing that in my son. He has that sense of justice, and he's going to go out and one day become a great lawyer or a great policeman as he rights all the wrongs in the world because of this resiliency factor that he has. And he has empathy for others. Or another thing, Javier, similar to my son, has empathy for others, particularly women in jeopardy. So that's a great factor that he has as well. We're going to, this says do your activity. We're going to pause for a second. We're going to get done a little bit early. So I want to pause on that real quick. But I want you to notice what strengths or talents you can encourage in your child. So you're going to fill out that bottom part of the My Child worksheet that we had. And those things that I want you to focus on there are strengths and talents you can encourage, what people have served as role models. And when you're looking at that, you may think that their whole childhood has been negative and that there hasn't been anyone that's been positive. But I'm wondering if there has been, if there's been a teacher or an aunt or even a parent that has been positive in a certain way. Maybe overall, maybe they struggle with drug abuse, but maybe they've been really positive in encouraging a certain skill in the child. So really take a close look and see where there is some positives in their lives. That's one of the things we're going to talk about, I think, in module 5 or 6, is about seeing the positives amongst all the negatives in their life and really building upon those positives. So it's a good idea to look at that now. What people have served as sources of strengths or comfort, we kind of talked about that. What does your child see as being within his or her control? Another really good thing to examine. This is why I like the My Child worksheets. Some of this curriculum to me doesn't flow as I would like. I'd like to do it a little bit different ways. We do it the way that they've told us to do it. But the one thing I do really like about this curriculum is the My Child worksheets, because I really feel like it brings it home. It really helps you to help with the child that you're working with or the children that you have in your home or in your classroom. So I really like when people can take the time to fill out these worksheets, because I think it's a more practical help for you. So take the time to examine, what does your child see as being within his or her control? And then what causes larger than him or herself could your child participate in? Is it Scouts? Is it a church group? Is it a school group? Having them have something to do, is really beneficial. A bored teenager, in my opinion, is a teenager just waiting for trouble. So I always like to get my kids involved as much as possible. Sports is a wonderful thing for them to feel larger than themselves, feel a part of a team. So what special interests and talents do they have that you could get them involved in, that they could participate in and enjoy? As resource parents, Fred Rogers, you can't go wrong with quoting Mr. Rogers, right? We're like shuttles on a loom. They join the threads of the past with threads of the future and leave their own bright patterns as they go. By parenting in a trauma-informed way, we can leave new bright patterns on the lives of the children that we work with. And that's the great thing. And the thing that I want you to leave with today is that there is hope, that as resource parents, we can help take this trauma that they've experienced, and we can see it in a different light, and hopefully we can help them deal with it. And so that it's not impacting their lives daily as they grow and develop. And that's really the great thing about being a resource parent, in my opinion, is being able to see that change in the children as they grow and see them being able to overcome some of this really hard stuff that they've had to go through. It's such an amazing experience, in my opinion. Does anyone have any comments or questions about anything that we've talked about? I did want to mention, while we're waiting for anyone, if you have something, in your books that you were sent or emailed, in back of all of the chapters, there's supplemental material that you can read. Obviously, there's so much to go over. There's no way I can touch on all of it. But in the back of each module, there's supplemental material that I really do encourage you to look through. Some's better than others. Some's more maybe applicable to your situation more than others. But all of the supplemental material is really, really helpful. I'm going to mention again, I put in the chat there, and then also when you got the email, that tiny URL, if you just click on that, it will take you to the surveys where you write 3 things that you learned on there, and that will get you the hour credit that you need. And then you'll also want to, I'm going to stop sharing real quick and show you the module worksheets here. So you'll also want to make sure you turn this in to your RFC. And as I mentioned, I think it's a good idea to turn it into your regional trainer as well. And then I would appreciate if you send it to me too, as long as you're CCing people. I always like to learn, see what you learned, and see where I could do better too. So if you want to CC it to me, that would be great. But make sure you turn this in as well to your RFC for sure. So they can know that you're taking these classes and to get level 3 certified. But to get the hours, so you have to do 2 things. I guess I want to reiterate. Fill out the survey of 3 things you learned, and then turn this into your RFC and CC me and your regional trainer. And then like I said, we're out a little bit early, but hopefully that will give you time to finish up the 3rd section of the My Child worksheet. And so you can kind of see what your child's resiliencies are and what they have, the positives that you can encourage there. And with that, if there's not any other questions, I will let everyone go. I will stay on for a little bit. So if there is any questions of a personal nature, you're welcome to stay on and talk to me there. Otherwise, we will see you next Saturday, bright and early at 9 a.m. And we will do modules 3 and 4. Thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful rest of your Saturday.
Is this training for a 3-hour, or do we count it just as the minus the half an hour?
No, it's 3 hours.
You can count it for the 3 hours. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Have a good week.
Yeah. Thanks.
Bye.
I can't seem to find that page where we fill that out. Is that something that was sent to us, or is that something that we need to print off now?
The worksheets.
Yeah.
Yeah, it should have been sent to you, but I can send it to her again.
Oh, maybe it was sent. Was it sent in an email or sent in the papers that were coming?
Oh yeah, it was sent through the email.
Oh, okay. Then I'll look at it there. Okay,
Yeah.
sounds good. I was like, can't find it in any of these papers.
Sorry, yeah, I should have made sure to be clear on that one. It was sent through the email.
You're good. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Carson. Appreciate your coming.
Yeah, of course.